Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Discriminating Gamer, the board game world's Tom and Helen, to the Dice Tower's George and Wheezy. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to go ahead and take a look at Istanbul, the dice game from AEG. In Istanbul, the dice game, 2 to 4 players take on the roles of merchants and traders as they compete in a bazaar to gain the most money. The game has a lot of simple components. You've got, of course, a little board, you've got crystals, you've got rubies, you've got dice, and all sorts of other kooky things. Now, how the game works is you and your friends are going to go ahead and do a series of actions every turn. Now, on your turn, the very first thing you're going to do is, first of all, if you have got some mosque tiles, which you can buy as the game progresses, you get any kind of resources from those tiles. You know, you get extra dice, or you get a bazaar card, or you get some lira. You get all sorts of things from those mosque tiles. Now, the next thing you're going to do is roll the dice. Now, all things being equal, you're going to roll 5 dice. But you may be able to roll more, as I say, if you have those mosque tiles that give you extra dice. Now, the dice have different resources on the sides, green, blue, red, etc. They're also going to have bazaar cards, which allow you to draw the bazaar cards, more on that later. And then you also have the lira, which allow you to take lira from the bank. So you're going to go ahead and spend the dice that you've rolled in different ways. For instance, if you have 2 of a kind, you can spend that with one of your actions to essentially take 1 resource token of that color. If you have, say, 3 of different kinds, you can take a wild token, resource token. If you have, 2 different kinds, you can spend those to take a crystal, which lets you do re-rolls on future rolls. So there's all sorts of things that can pop up that you can spend those dice in order to give you those benefits, those abilities, those tokens, and you only have 2 actions unless you buy a mosque tile, which is something you can buy, which is going to give you an extra action. Now, when you buy mosque tiles, you, of course, first of all, have to be able to meet the requisite requirements. If it says, 3 red tokens, you have to pay the 3 red tokens, but you also have to spend 3 dice. So there is, the number of dice rather that's specified. So there is this kind of balancing act for getting the resources, but then kind of leveraging those resources to buy the mosque tiles that will give you better advantages as the game goes on. Now, as I say, if you roll a die and you get a bazaar card, that leads to the bazaar deck. And I'll tell you, some of these cards are really bizarre. With John Biner. The bazaar cards have a lot of different abilities and things they can give you, and oftentimes they don't just give the active player, the player who drew them, an ability, they'll also give the other players a lesser ability as well. So this is a great way to pay attention even when it's not your turn, because some of those bazaar cards can affect what you're doing. At the end of your turn, you pass the 5 dice to the next person clockwise, and then they go through it all again. Now, the point of the game is to try to collect rubies that are on the player board, and there's different ways you can collect the rubies. For instance, if you have a number of the colored tokens, you can buy a ruby off of that specific area, off of that specific point on the board. There's also, if you get like a certain number of a certain kind of resources, you can go ahead and get a ruby. And then, of course, you can buy rubies. Depending on how many coins you have, you can actually buy these rubies. But the thing of it is, every time you're taking a ruby off the board, it makes the next ruby in that progression more expensive. You have to spend more in order to get it. Now, in most games, if it's the first person to 6 triggers the end game. In the 4-player game, I think it's 4 or 5. But what happens is, once you trigger the end game, you get to finish the round. Everybody gets a chance to have a last turn. After everybody has taken that final round, whoever has the most rubies will win the game. If, of course, there is a tie, then there is tiebreakers with lira and whatnot. But generally speaking, as I say, whoever has the most rubies wins Istanbul, the dice game. So what do I think of Istanbul, the dice game? There is, I guess, a larger board game called Istanbul. I've never played it. I heard that's a pretty good game. Chris was telling me who played this game with me. But this game is, for me, it's a little lighter. It's a little... this is not the kind of game that I rush to, that I grab off the shelf and say, "Ooh, let's play this." But it's a game I appreciate, and it's a game that if somebody else, breaks out, I enjoy. And I did like it. I do like games where you're rolling dice and you got to determine what actions you need to do with the dice. Again, they're not my favorite games, but they're fun. I enjoy them. So I liked Istanbul, the dice game. I liked the variety in the tiles. I like that you can kind of, over the course of the game, gain some asymmetrical powers that the dice give you, extra actions or more money or more dice, and that's really interesting. And it's interesting to see how different people get different advantages and they'll affect the game in different ways. I like that. I also like the bazaar cards, how they really changed a lot of things and brought a lot of, as I say, kind of that sugar and spice to the game. And I liked too with the bazaar cards the ones where, as I say, the active player gets like the main advantage, but then other players also have an advantage, or they gain something, or at least get the chance to gain something. I really like those cards as well, because again, I like games that make you pay attention even when it's not your turn, and I thought that was very, very fun. So all things considered, I like this game. If you like dice rolling games and you like these kind of resource management and set collection and stuff like that, if you enjoy that kind of a game, then absolutely, by all means, you're going to want to buy Istanbul, the dice game. Thank you once again for joining us today on The Discriminating Gamer. As always, we ask you to please leave a comment for us on YouTube, on Board Game Geek, on our Facebook page, or on thediscriminatinggamer.com. We ask you to please like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter. We are The Discriminating Gamer, and ladies and gentlemen, I am convinced that George Jefferson hated Bentley because he was British, just like Thomas Jefferson hated the British.
Please somebody help me on my feet again, and I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know where I've been. Please somebody help me on the solid ground. It's a long time, and I'll be dying. Once a year I wind up in the band.
How's our damage?
Much faster.
Looks pretty good.